Hi, I'm Steve from the Rooted Podcast, and I hope you can join me every weekday for a 5-minute or less devotional word study or insight into Scripture to add to your day. Welcome to Fruit Snacks. Hey everyone, in today's Bible background episode, I wanted to look at an aspect of Hebrew culture that God instituted right into the book of Leviticus that has a dramatic impact on the way that nearly everything worked in Israelite culture and how it ties directly into the New Testament and even into our lives today. And that concept is this whole idea of the Jubilee, or the year of Jubilee. So what was it? Well, if we look at Leviticus chapters 25 and 27, and you read through those, what you'll find is numerous references to this thing called a Jubilee. And essentially, it was a reset button for the community, both on an individual scale and on a corporate scale. Every 7 years, there would be a Jubilee. And during that time, the land would be rested from farming, the crops would be rotated. Anyone who had been in indentured servitude would be released. Debts would be forgiven. If land, ancestral land that was given when the nation of Israel and the tribes took their allotments when they entered the promised land, if land had been sold, ancestral land, it would be returned. And so, like I said, it was basically a big reset button on the culture. Now, that doesn't mean that God is somehow anti-capitalist or against people owning things for themselves or acquiring wealth or doing any of those things. So we shouldn't assume that that is the point, that it has something to do with some current economic system that we enjoy or see in our world today. Rather, we need to think backwards if we're going to understand the Jubilee, because the Jubilee was modeled after what God did. All through the law, we see that when God asks his people to do something, it is almost always because that thing is a reflection or an echo of who God is or what he has done. And case in point, the Jubilee, being every 7 years, is an echo of the creation week, where on the seventh day, God rested. So what were the Israelite people supposed to learn from this? Well, for one, the importance of rest and of baking that into our lives, making rest and recovery and redemption a part of our lives, so that they would see it, and they would see it often enough in their own lifetime that it would be difficult to forget. They would either be looking back to one that had just happened, or they would be looking forward to the next one. So you were never very far away from a Jubilee. And I mentioned this idea of redemption. And if you read Leviticus 25, what you see is that that term is almost always associated with Jubilee. It's in the same verses most of the time. And that tells us, or should tell us, that one of the theological points being communicated to Israel during this Jubilee cycle is that God is in the business of redemption. And indeed, if we look at the story of the Bible from a big picture, we know that when it's all said and done, God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth, and that things are going to be restored or redeemed back to the way that they were originally intended by God to be. We will live in a new Eden, a global Eden, where God is present with us and where things are as God intended them to be from the beginning. And one of the theological messages that is being sent by this idea of a Jubilee every 7 years is to remind God's people that God is in the business of restoring things back to the way they were intended to be. And so, no matter how bad things get, no matter how hard the circumstances may seem at the moment. The Jubilee taught God's people that there is always hope, that there is always restoration, and that God will ultimately make things the way that they're supposed to be.